Hi folks, it's me again, and it's time for another Movies by Month. Apologies for this is so late because frankly it's June now and this is the video for March, but I am catching up on these. I've just had so many other things to do and the hot weather's actually been keeping me outside of the house rather than inside the house. But it's here now, and hopefully this is going to be here to help you pick up some fun things to watch or tell you what things you should avoid. And the first of the films I watched at home during March was actually a Netflix movie. It was 13 Hours, The Secret Soldiers of Benghazi. And as I'm sure you're shocked to hear from that title, it's a war film. Or more correctly, it's more like a soldier's movie. You see, it's actually the account of a real life event that took place in Libya around about September 11th, 2012. And it's all about the 13 hours during which there's a standoff between a bunch of mercenaries, all assigned to protect CIA operatives in Benghazi, as well as them helping out the ambassador's staff in the local embassy, as well as protecting their own base against a load of local militia gangs attacking them. And it's a Michael Bay movie. You know, Michael crash bang wallop camera always moving Michael Bay, the one that they coined the term Bay him about because all of his movies have this total crazy raw kinetic action happening and bright exaggerated colours and huge fireballs and things are always moving and it's all kind of crazy. And this movie, it's very much like that. I mean, it's got a pretty good cast with absolutely everybody from some Good News guy, John Krasinski in the lead, and the James Badge Dale who was in the Pacific, and you'll have seen him in a million other films, and even David Costibla who played Gale in Breaking Bad, and he's a kind of bookish and inept CIA head of office. And this film basically isn't a million miles away from something like Black Hawk Down, and even in some ways it's a bit like Zulu, where an awful lot of people are holding up and shooting guns at a bunch of extras, and eventually some of them die, but the majority of them get away alive at the end. And the only problem is, this is barely as intelligent a film as Zulu or Black Hawk Down. I mean, this is gung-ho jock type stuff with constant scenes of the main dudes lamenting how things like the ambassador's ex-marine security team are really just totally stupid and don't seem to know anything about it despite being ex-army, or how the CIA guy is completely unrealistic and is such a pencil pusher, where as opposed to like the real hot dog chomping, beer guzzling, rah-rah kind of guys who they portray all the mercenaries as. But the thing is, the film has the look and concept of a better made film, or better written films anyway. And it doesn't really help that the film is literally the basis for one of the worst levels on the new Call of Duty game. I mean, a lot of you might not actually play those games, but yeah, basically, there is one level of that game that is literally based entirely on this film and what it looks like. Yeah, so you actually probably have more fun playing that than watching this movie. That said, it is a definite solid 3 out of 5. It's not a terrible film, it's mindless fun, and if you like your military man shooty bang bang films, then you'll definitely have a fun time here. The next film I saw is actually kind of two movies, and I'm going to cheat a wee bit here. But see, the thing is, I saw the trailer for one of these films, and then found out it was actually a sequel to another movie, so I watched both. And those films were V and The Iron Mask. Although, to be honest, they've got so many different names in so many different countries around the world that you could be confused. Basically just the way these things look, you'll know if you're watching them. V is the story about Jason Fleming, who you probably recognise from quite a few different things, but mostly from the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And he's a cartographer, exploring Ukraine back in the early 1800s, and he stumbles into a wee village haunted by a thing called the V, which is like a creepy folk monster. But he really spends most of the film embroiled in a kind of local village politics thing. And the second film, The Iron Mask, is the same guy, but he ends up travelling off to China with a Chinese manservant who's actually a girl in disguise, and she's actually really a princess and a kung fu expert, and she's heir to the kingdom of a dragon that makes tea with its eyelashes. No, I mean seriously, I'm not making this up. But the thing is, the movie was totally sold on the fact that if you saw the trailer, it has Jackie Chan and Arnold Schwarzenegger in it, and them having like some massive big fight all around the Tower of London. But the fact is, that's really only something that happens in the first 20 minutes of the movie, and the rest of the film, they aren't even in it. And both of these movies are total nonsense. I mean, they're written for a Russian audience, and half the time, Jason Fleming isn't even involved in the plot, even though he's supposed to be the main character. And it's all dubbed really, really badly by basically everyone. And the script is, honestly, half the time it just doesn't make sense, and the rest of the time it's just really inane nonsense with people talking about stuff that's kind of unrelated to what's going on. And the second film is kind of supposed to be a sort of mixture of Man in the Iron Mask, but it's also got the Russian Tsar and Fleming's wife, and it ends up turning straight into a rip-off of Pirates of the Caribbean, only done totally on the cheap and really cheesily. So basically, I'd say, yeah, I'd skip both of these. I watch weird bad films so that you don't have to. So V and Iron Mask, they both get 2 stars. I mean, they're not utterly unwatchable, but generally I would say avoid them. They're both gubbins. The next of the films that I watched at home was this strange little kind of indie movie called The Wolf Hour, And it's got Naomi Watts as this kind of reclusive author living in squalor in her dead grand's South Bronx flat during, I think it was the Summer of Sam, which is in the late 1970s. And she's kind of a bit of a annoying hoarder, and she's also a grimy sweatbox, living inside a grimy sweatbox, and she struggles with her art, which is writing, and her depression, and it's kind of a fascinating look in a lot of ways into people who can't stand to go outside but also can't get by on their own, and her struggles to kind of survive while still pissing off everybody around her, all the while working up on a follow-up novel to a book that she wrote that managed to basically annoy her whole family to the point that nobody wants to speak to her, and made her kind of have a bit of a self-breakdown. And at times it's quite a difficult watch because, as I said, Watt's character, June, is deliberately irritating and difficult, making it really tough to actually get endeared to her. But by the end, you'll be at the very least for rooting for her to actually make a few changes to her life and her situation. But the way it kind of evokes the time and the place and this sense of this horrifically oppressive heat and during this unbelievably hot summer and the sort of nasty grime of everything is really palpable. I mean, you really feel kind of dirty by the end of the film, but in a good way, because you just feel like you've been through this with it. And it's kind of impressive considering I watched this in the middle of the winter when it was cold in Scotland. So yeah, I'm going to give this a solid 3 out of 5. I mean, it's not amazing, but it's also not the worst way to spend a few hours. And the last of the movies I watched at home in March was a quirky wee Scottish film that came out a couple of years ago but I never got round to watching, and it's called Anna and the Apocalypse. Now, imagine for a minute your average high school drama. Okay, we've all seen those. Now imagine that it's also a musical. Yeah, been there, done that. But now imagine it's also set at Christmas. And yeah, sure, there's probably movies like that as well. And here's where Anna and the Apocalypse takes the cake, because it's also a zombie movie. Okay, so right, it's all set in this wee Scottish town. Although I think it's a Scottish town, but you'd never really know because most of the cast have English accents. But wee Anna is this lassie who's bored and glum, and she's kind of fallen out with her dad, who's also the school janitor. She wants to take a gap year and travel after she finishes high school, but he doesn't want that. And before she can sort it out with him, zombies happen, right in the middle of the Christmas talent show, and it's all up to her, her best friend John, their sort of American pal Steph, and their camera-loving mate Chris, all trying to get back to the school and meet up with family members, friends, or better halves. And the film is basically your standard zombie movie in terms of plot, but what really set it apart for me is it's really, really funny, and also the songs are just genuinely a lot of good fun. And I'm not a massive one for musicals, but I always did like that one episode of Buffy where they started singing and dancing, and this kind of feels like it has the same energy as that. And it had some really good moments. I mean, it even had like a saucy Christmas number, and it also had an amazing villain song sung by Paul Kay, who you might recognise as the Fire Priest off Game of Thrones. And it's not perfect, mind. I mean, you know, it's incredibly stop-start a few times in it, and it's kind of weird in that the time passage is all over the place, with them apparently taking them nearly 2 days to walk just from somebody's house to school in a wee town. You see a lot of wide shots of it, and it's not actually that big. But yeah, it's not the kind of film where you actually want to worry too much about it, and you'll have a really good time with it. So I would definitely give it a nice big chunky bloody 4 out of 5, and I recommend that you check it out. And since March was still back when the world's kind of made sense, or at least the first half of it was, I actually made it out to the cinema to see a few movies. So first up, I'm actually going to cheat again a little bit and tell you about 2 films, one of which was at the cinema and the other one was on DVD, but both of them were kind of connected. And the one in the cinema was the latest Terry Gilliam film, The Man Who Killed Don Quixote. And that's your kind of typical Terry Gilliam film, which, if you've ever seen it, you know what I mean, but if not, it's all weird camera angles, kind of larger than life characters. It looks all a bit strange. There's a lot of kind of bizarre daring do and pratfalling. I mean, he was the guy behind Time Bandits and The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, and Don Quixote is kind of in that sort of style, but then other parts of it are far more like his more sensible, situational, bizarre, real-life comedy films. Things like Tidelands, or maybe the less depressing parts of 12 Monkeys. And the plot of The Man Who Killed Don Quixote is all about Adam Driver, and he's an ad executive shooting an advert in Spain. It turns out he's right beside this small town where he made his final year student movie, which was Don Quixote. And he ends up bumping into the demented old bootmaker who played the guy in his student film, but it turns out the old guy has actually become convinced he really is the old Spanish nobleman. So, due to a bunch of wacky events, they end up being chased by cops and getting into weird adventures, and there's a whole bunch of Russian mobsters after them as well for reasons, and it all gets kind of crazy in the most Terry Gilliam way you can imagine. But It's an absolute 5 out of 5. And I'm not going to spoil any more about it, just tell you go and see it. It's probably one of the best films he's ever made, if not the best. And the film that was related to it was one called Lost in La Mancha. And that's a wee documentary all about when he tried to make the film 20 years ago and everything went wrong. And I literally mean everything goes wrong, to the point where the whole film just gets abandoned completely after only a few days, and it never actually got finished. And the documentary follows the whole thing right from the beginning, when they're all really excited, right up to the point when all the sets get washed away in like a flood and a whole load of other things happen. And that's not really spoiling anything, because it's all about watching them all react to everything. If you're actually interested in how people make films, it's kind of an amazing insight into a movie that never got finished, and that anything ever got made out of this is kind of a mini miracle, especially the fact that the film that came out in the end is really, really good. So I mean, I would say that's probably a good 4 out of 5 as well. But I would definitely watch The Man Who Killed Don Quixote first if you can, because you don't want to spoil anything, and it really is an absolutely amazing film. So yeah, check them both out. And the next film up was a very sinister and downbeat legal drama, based on a true story, and that was Dark Waters. And that was all about a haunted Japanese tap in an apartment. No, wait, that's Dark Water. Or possibly Dark Water, the American remake. No, actually, it's neither of those. I'm talking about Dark Waters, that has an S at the end. And this is the story of how the real-life chemical company lawyer, Robert Billet, played by the Hulk himself, Mark Ruffalo, took on the DuPont Chemical Company for poisoning the water supply around in a small American farming town. And it caused all kinds of horrible cancers and problems, not only to the local wildlife, but also the good, honest people who live there. And it's a really dark, hence the name, and shady investigative movie. It's kind of courtroom drama, part detective story, part social action documentary. I mean, think of something like Erin Brockovich, because it's basically that kind of film, but instead of Julia Roberts, you've got socially awkward Hulk, and instead of Albert Finney, you've got Tim Robbins being kind of reasonable as a lawyer. And I won't get into the weeds too much about this, partly because it's really complicated, and partly because it would give a lot of the interesting stuff about the film away, because a lot of the drama comes from him uncovering information and the surprising turns and reveals. But it's amazingly acted, with some really solid performances all round. Also, bizarrely, the whole thing's shot like a horror movie. Like, genuinely, it looks like it's been shot like a horror film, and in a way it kind of is. It's a real life horror story. But suffice to say, it's an absolutely brilliant 4 out of 5 movie. So yeah, definitely go and see it if you can. But that just leaves me with the movie to end all movies. The final film that I've seen at the pictures, because at the time I'm recording this, the cinemas have been closed now for several months, and still aren't looking like they're going to be open anytime soon. So, that movie, that incredible film, was Bloodshot, the Vin Diesel movie that some of my audience will maybe have already made a point of seeing, because it also stars the Outlander heartthrob hunk, Sam Heughan. And it's all about how Vin Diesel is like this kick-ass US Marine guy who gets like badly hurt and wakes up a wee bit in the future, where he's been rebuilt out of nanites, and he basically can't get killed because his body just regrows and regenerates. And he's part of a team that includes Big Sam as a guy with gammy legs who had them replaced with a robot chassis spine attachment that works a wee bit like Doc Octopus of Spider-Man. And they kill bad guys for the government under the supervision of Guy Pearce. And of course, nothing's ever straightforward, and there's an awful lot more going on than you'd think at first glance. In fact, one thing I really liked about Bloodshot is that it started off really cheesy and naff, and I was like, oh god, this is really feels like a really bad action movie. But then as it progresses, it turns out you're supposed to think that. And without getting into spoilers, I mean, obviously, if you've seen the trailer, you know that Vin ends up having to fight with some of the other guys. And that's not really a spoiler, because it literally is most of the trailers. But it was a fun, interesting action movie. I mean, it's nothing spectacular, it's definitely nothing to write home about, and it's pretty basic, but if you want kind of by-the-numbers piece of cheesy sci-fi fun that frankly could have been made for buttons with a no-name cast and would have probably been just about as good, then go and see it. It's a passable 3 out of 5 Vins. So that was March. And I'm going to be back with April's movie rundown as soon as I can. Hopefully it'll be a lot sooner than this one took. In the meantime, please remember you can follow me on Twitter and chat to me there at Grumpy Opinions. There's a Facebook group, and if you're feeling really generous, you can sign up to my Patreon. Until next time, I've been Ian, and these have been my Grumpy Opinions. Special thanks to my top tier patrons Michelle Forbes and Judith Coloma. Thanks guys, and thanks to all my patrons, and thanks to everybody else who watches the channel, and I hope you all have a great time. Bye bye.